Our keynote speakers and panelists would talk about two dimensions of addressing gender inequalities with adolescents, two dimensions that are often overlooked by programs, funders, and research. So one is challenging masculinity, harmful masculinity behavior, and the other one is expanding access to transgender adolescents. So for the first keynote speech of the day, I have Sirri Cynthia Wakuna here with me. She is the lead of Mothers of Hope in Cameroon, and she's also the Her Voice ambassador for Cameroon. And she'll be giving a talk, bringing evidence and grounding this evidence with her own experience about like engaging with young boys and young men, and to address and to change negative masculinity behaviors. So welcome, Cynthia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aline. Thank you everyone for being here. So, would I want to go to the, do I need to go to the other side?
To you, if you want to go there.
All right. Yeah. Okay, I think I'd rather stand. Thank you very much. So my name is Sirri Cynthia Wakuna. I come from Cameroon, as earlier said. I am Programs Director at Mother of Hope Cameroon, and I am the Her Voice Horn Ambassador for Cameroon. And so today I'll be sharing with you my experiences in relation to gender, toxic masculinities, really bringing to you a perspective that is lived and that is typical of communities. So, can I have the next slide, please? Check in. Oh. Okay, great. So, how gender inequalities affect adolescents? I think it's a little bit far for me, so I'll use from here. So this on the screen, you'll see a story of a young girl called Nadia. Maybe a bit difficult for you to read, but I'll walk you through. So Nadia is a 16-year-old girl who leaves her rural community in Mubang in the northwest region to go live with her aunt in town to continue her education. And as soon as she gets to town, a couple of months into it, she has her first period, and she tells her aunt about it. And her aunt tells her, "You are now a woman. If you allow a boy see your pants, you get pregnant. Only your future husband is allowed to see your pants." So a couple of years down the line, she gets a boyfriend and has challenges negotiating condom use. And so each time she proposes it, he would tell her, "If you don't want to have sex with me without a condom, I'll just take another girl who's willing to give it to me without a condom." And so she's forced into this, and she does this, and then her friend tells her about the morning after pill, and she goes to the pharmacy to pick up the morning after pill, and the older lady at the back of the counter gives her a scary look when she mentions the name of the drug, and then tells her, "As young as you are, you're already doing bad things." So, of course, from your reaction, I can tell that you can understand the issues that we're raising here. Very, very glaringly, first of all, there's a lack of comprehensive sexual education, because all her aunts could tell her is, "You're a woman. Now if you allow a guy to see your pants, you get pregnant." And that's all she had to go home with. She didn't understand what menstruation was all about. She didn't know anything about fertile, safe and unsafe periods, calculating her cycle. And that is the reason that has translated to her not being able to negotiate condom use. She doesn't know anything about body autonomy. She doesn't know anything about body rights. So she's blank. And then, because of how young men are wired, he thinks it's his right to have sex without a condom. These are the toxic masculinities we're talking about, and this is information that has been handed over to him by fathers and brothers, and he thinks that it's his right to enjoy sex without a condom. And then we see the older woman in the pharmacy who tells her, "As young as you are, you're already doing bad things." So sex is connoted as a bad thing, and then doesn't give her any information. Next time, would Nadia want to go back to get contraceptive? No, because Sexual reproductive health rights services are not adolescent friendly. They are not friendly to young women. And they are the ones who need to access these services more often. But oftentimes service provision is not wired in a way, where I come from at least, that they are willing and happy to go get this information. We'll move to the next slide. So the next slide is a survey. This is a survey. It's really just trying to emphasize, and to present the need for transformative initiatives that address toxic masculinities, and how positive social behaviors and norms is able to have a direct impact on sexual and reproductive health right outcomes for adolescent girls and young women. We will see that where interventions pay attention to challenging these social norms, adolescent girls stay longer in school, and they are able to get the education that they need, and they are able to avoid multiple sex partners, and they are able to also negotiate contraception use. So these are the figures. I think it's a little bit too small, but I'm trying to give you a little bit what really this survey is talking about, figures to justify all of that. Of course, at the end of my slides, there's a whole lot of resources. You can be able to look it up later and look at the figures. The next slide as well is a survey done in Kenya, and is really also emphasizing how addressing social norms and toxic masculinity can be able to keep girls longer in school, reduce HIV infections, and all this survey was done in Kenya. So I'm trying to give a broad overview of how addressing toxic masculinities is important to reducing HIV and AIDS amongst adolescent girls and young women, because the question still remains. We're doing a lot of work. We're talking a lot about these things, but why are the rates of HIV amongst adolescent girls and young women, why is it continuously on the rise? I think it's time we begin to look at factors that sometimes we don't often see clearly, but have a strong hold on recycling the occurrence of infections. The next slide talks about why approaching men and boys. Because I tell people, if you talk to a young girl, she has a brother. If she doesn't have a brother, she has a boyfriend. If she doesn't have a boyfriend, she has a father. So the lives of women, adolescent girls and young women, are interwoven to men one way or the other. And so interventions that fail to have a holistic approach in bringing these partners together would hardly have sustainable impacts. So I share with you another experience. So during the 16 days activism against GBV in 2021, our organization, Mother of Hope, had a discussion session with adolescent girls and young women. And these are the highlights about what they had to say. One said, I need to take permission from my husband before I can take my antiretroviral drugs. The other said, my husband says I am not allowed to get to go for contraceptions of any kind, and I have 5 children already. And another one says that when I try to tell my husband how I want to be touched in bed, he asks me if I'm a prostitute. Only prostitutes ask for styles. My father told me when I was going to my husband's house that my body belongs to my husband. My husband should never have to beg for sex. My body belongs to my husband. And one time when I was pregnant and the nurse invited us for a lecture, asking us to bring our partners along, my husband refused to accompany me, saying that it's a women's thing. Lectures about antenatal, prenatal, contraceptive, he says it's a woman's thing. These are manifestations of toxic masculinities. This is how it has been passed on, and this is how men try to enhance or emphasize the fact that they are men. And interestingly, they are so deeply rooted, so much that even the level of education doesn't matter. There are men who are very educated, but who hold on strongly to some of these values that are toxic and harmful to women. Even where they are, whether in the regions, whether in the urban cities, or on the youth, it doesn't change how they internalize these things, because it has been passed on at the time when they are young boys and adolescents, and that's when they are able to internalize their societies and their environments. Now, we begin to see how no matter how much empowerment, sensitization, or education you give to a woman, is what her husband or her boyfriend says that goes. Imagine a young woman having to take permission from a boyfriend or husband to get her antiretroviral drugs. How does she get better? And how do we get to the level where a man determines whether you should live a healthy life or not? So these are the issues that we are talking about. Now, what works? Next slide, please. What works in shifting social norms? And the picture I gave you before is just the reason why we need to bring men on board. Because in everything that they said, There was a man influencing something at the corner. And so we could not be able to address these issues without bringing men to the table. What works? Identifying entry points. I'd like to share with you a little bit how we are able to, at our organization, address some of these issues really at community level, exploring the smallest levels of decision making, as small as the traditional councils within the communities. First of all is identifying gender entry points, because we have realized that it's not easy to talk to men as it is easy to talk to women. Because first of all, there's this resistance. What do you want to tell us? You talk about women empowerment. You're teaching our women to disrespect us. You're teaching them to bring all this crazy stuff back at home, and we are not interested. So what do we do? One, we need to identify entry points. How do we get access to these men? And what has worked for us is that we've been able to use humanitarian interventions to get into these communities. Oftentimes we distribute sanitary pads and give free talks and education to capture the attention of the communities. That way they're able to trust us enough to get into these communities and talk to these women. And in terms of entry points, we're also trying to understand who has influence on these boys and men. Who? We're talking about the who and where can you meet these boys and men? If you get into a community and invite men to a hall to have a talk with them, they won't come. But if you go to the residence of the traditional ruler and invite them, they would come there because they attach importance to that structure. So it's identifying the influencers. Who are those who are able to influence adolescent boys and men? Who do they look up to as models, role models? It could be traditional leaders, as in our case. It's also religious leaders. So once we identify these entry points, where do we go to? We go to the churches. We find men there. We go to their social gatherings on Sundays where they have palm wine and drink and talk about little things. If we meet them there, they listen better to the things we have to say and why it's important for them to support their wives, why it's important for them to challenge these social norms that are harmful to women, why it's important for them to be able to accompany their wives, in terms of education and all. What also works is long-term interventions, because challenging these norms is not a one-off thing. It doesn't just happen like that. And that's why in our work, we're not concerned about the numbers. We're concerned about if we're able to transform one person, because really that is where the impact is. And it's not a one-off thing. We have clubs in schools where we have young boys coming in. Sometimes they jump into these clubs where we talk about menstruation and HIV and they jump out. And they say, no, it's a girl's thing. I can't talk about menstrual hygiene and talk about pads because my friends will laugh at me. But over time, when they gain maturity, they come back to these clubs. And that's how we have he for she ambassadors. Because it takes time. It takes a lot of changing the mindset. It's not a one-off thing. You need to be able to deconstruct and reconstruct some ideas that have been put in. What also works is identifying interests. Oftentimes, we need to identify an area where the men have an interest. If you tell a man that if you have fewer children, your wife is going to be able to take care of them better. If she's educated, she's going to be able to nourish your children better and the children live longer. He sees an interest in that and why he should listen to you. If you tell them that, if you empower women economically, it takes off the financial burden on you, he sees the interest in it and he listens to you. So that's how these things happen. And also giving spaces for these women to be able to express themselves. And that's also what we do at the Have Voice Fund, because it's giving spaces for adolescents and young women to talk about issues that affect their health. It's giving them spaces to be able to talk to decision makers and demand for their rights to be part of the processes that affect their health. We also have as what works, okay? We also have as work works, ensuring interventions do not reproduce the cycle of violence, because we also don't want to put these women in a position where they go back and meet more violence. So whatever we think that could be harmful to her, we try to manage it as much as possible. So talking to boys and men works, almost rounding off. Talking to boys and men work. This is a success story. When we met Aisha, she was 18 years old, a Muslim. She had 2 children already, 3 children, and she was pregnant with another. And we had to talk to her. She was looking for a boy, because she had only girls. And their community was particular about the boy child. So we had the opportunity to talk to her husband. And today he is a he for she ambassador. Aisha has sent all 3 girls to school. And she is on contraception. She also helps us to facilitate some of our discussion sessions in these communities. This is what we mean about transformation, even if it's just one family. You see how these go to have more external influences, even on education for the girl child. By addressing sexual reproductive health and rights, we now have 3 young girls who are able to go to school, and the valorization of the girl child. Challenges to scale this up, limited funding. Of course, oftentimes funders do not provide funding particularly for addressing issues of toxic masculinity. And so we need to stretch the fundings that we have sometimes to include these different aspects to address the immediate need. Tracking impact is difficult when it comes to social norms because it has to do with people's perceptions, and really tracking the impact could be challenging. Displacement in conflict, where I come from, we're presently having a socio-political crisis which has turned into an armed conflict, and this has disrupted the work that we do. We are no longer able to access some of these communities because of the war, and we don't have any kind of protection mechanisms for those of us who go on the field. Opportunities. Use of available data to inform better programming. I think that this is what this presentation is all about, presenting data, evidence, perception to be able to provide available more data and to bring interest on the topic. Shifts of generational shifts. We're talking about capturing adolescent boys when they are young and able to internalize these things so that we can be able to transform their mindsets and to debunk harmful ideologies. Use of digital media and social marketing. It's using the social media, using digital platforms to be able to talk about these issues on a widespread. But of course, this is not a reality for some communities where I come from, because we still have issues of technology, we still have issues of connections and networks not available in some areas. But this is a potential opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll find the resources in the next slide. Thank you very much for your keen attention.